This is episode 198 of the Mixology Talk Podcast, and in this podcast, we will be talking to Zane Harris, who is a spirit specialist and consultant and bartender who helped design the new Riedel line of glassware for bars. There's a lot of really fun information in this one, and we definitely geek out and go down a rabbit hole with glassware, so stay tuned. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Mixology Talk Podcast. Today, we are going to geek out hard on one of my favorite topics, and that is glassware. So today we're going to bring in Zane Harris, who's helped with Riedel launch a new style of glassware. So welcome, Zane. How you doing, man?
Fantastic. Can't complain.
Awesome. Very cool. So we reached out to a couple of different glass companies, and Riedel reached out and said, we have a guy, he's perfect. You should talk to him because he loves glassware too. So I have so many questions, and I can't wait to ask you kind of your thoughts and your opinions on very particular things when it comes to glassware. But before we do that, how did you get so into glassware? Like, how did you get on the Riedel radar? Like, how was that journey kind of focused on glassware for you? How did that all start?
Well, I guess the question would be, how did I get started in the industry? Because that's when it really became kind of glaringly obvious that there was this need for new glassware. Because when I started, which was now almost 23 years ago, in Seattle, watching at one of my parents' very small bars when I was 16 years old, we were buying vintage glassware because it's the only thing that I could find that fit the cocktails that I found in these very old vintage cocktail books, like the Savoy cocktail book, which a lot of people are familiar with, or the Jones Guide. And their proportions were such that it was very obvious that the glassware that was on the market at that time was way too big, way too clunky, and was not made for any sort of classic cocktail. And as it stopped being a fad, and people started jumping on board with the whole cocktail renaissance, as we see now, not a fad anymore. Now it's a staple. This is the way of life. It's craft just as much as food is. I like to call it the slow drink movement, as it were. Some bars are slower than others. I was guilty of that in the beginning too. But the glassware was just one of these things that it was too fragile. It was too expensive. It was too cheap, maybe wrong proportions. I was always trying to shoehorn my drinks into someone else's glassware. And, in our industry, we could have connections with a distiller or someone who grew our produce, right? We can have farmer relationships. But one of the things that we never had across the board was who the heck makes our glassware? How do we have some sort of emotional connection to the glassware? Because we have an emotional connection to everything else that we work with behind the bar as bartenders. So in my head, it was like this thing that was always there, and I started taking notes. And as I was lucky enough to work with some of the best bartenders in the world that are more talented than I am and smarter than I am, I listened to their complaints, and I took little mental notes and sometimes actual physical notes with the idea that if I ever found myself in front of a glassware maker, didn't know at the time that would ever be a possibility. But if I ever did, I promised myself I'd go for it. Because as the years went by, no one seemed to fix the problem that was cocktail glassware.
Yeah, I think we've all kind of experienced this. You have your commercial lineup of glassware, and usually they're kind of thicker. Volumes aren't right, and I mean all these annoyances that we all have. So to be able to kind of get hands-on and really get specific on measurements and volumes and angles of the glassware, I bet was a lot of fun.
It was a blast, honestly. And to tell you the truth, if it wasn't for Riedel, and we'll get into how it all came to be, I'm sure, in this conversation. But the more I worked with Riedel, the more I realized they were used to working with experts in the wine industry and listening to them, listening to somms, listening to people who knew, more about wine, or as much about wine as they knew about glassware, really. And so I lucked out big time when I kind of joined forces with Riedel, because they're the only really family-owned glassware company in the world. They're on their 10th or 11th generation of glassware makers. That's amazing to me.
Yeah,
so there's a lot of resonance there.
Yeah, and I think that's how I got first. Riedel popped on my radar. I think as a lot of people do, is through wine education. And when I started to learn that there's different styles of glassware that I get paired with specific styles of wine, I think early on in my education, I kind of had a lot of the similar experiences that many other people do of like, come on, man, really? And then once you get in tune with it, and once you really start to evaluate it side by side, it becomes pretty alarming. Like, wow, this does make a difference. This does make a big change on the way I'm experiencing my wine. And I think that's probably a lot of natural progression. And unfortunately, I haven't seen that with cocktail glasses yet. So I'm pretty excited about this one.
It's actually funny that you mentioned that because just to get into the story of how I got in contact with Riedel. I owned my first bar when I was 23, 24. I ended up working in Seattle and the whole West Coast up and down, then of course the East Coast, and then internationally with bartender exchange programs. And so I was over in New York quite a bit, started doing a lot of consulting, like private consulting, and a lot of brand work. And I found myself being in New York more often than not. So I decided to move to New York. And I worked with the Milk and Honey family of bars for about 4 years. So Little Branch, Middle Branch, Attaboy, Dutch Kills, all of those bars. And so from that point, the whole thing with ice obviously kicked off, which we'll get to, because that's what this glassware is influenced by the ice. But then I wanted to get into private consulting. I was getting older, I didn't want to be behind the bar all the time. But one of the things I hated was I was trying to teach all of these accounts and these small business owners how to shave percentage points off of their pour cost. And then at the end, I would hand them a bill, for my services. And it just felt so like I'm trying to help these people be successful in their business. And yet here I am taking away from their operational capital. And, if you've ever owned or run a bar, cash flow is king. And when you're opening, operational capital is everything. And if you're in New York, where I'm at, take that operational capital number that you think you have in your head and double it because you're going to need it. So one day I was looking at the back bar and I saw all these brands, these beautiful brands, tons of money back there. And they're throwing it around, doing all sorts of crazy stuff with it. One thing they weren't really doing was paying a consultant, right? And to me, I thought that's what our friends could use the most. And so I wrote a proposal to the biggest distributor, which was Southern, saying, hey, I would like to be your in-house consultant, essentially. This thing that I would usually charge people $20,000, for, I want to give it for free and have your brands pay me instead through you guys. And they bit. And so I started doing consulting for free, essentially, in order to help out smaller accounts, really. Because, hotels, yeah, sure, they used me and utilized me, but they could afford a consultant. I'm talking more about the standalone places, the mom and pop joints, the ones that really give the city character. And through that, I started placing glassware, and Southern distributes Riedel glassware on the wine side. And the department that I was in was a place called Layover, and Layover is their fine wine division and also artisanal spirits division. So I was placing tons of glassware because if you're helping someone build out their bar, of course, they're going to listen to you about what kind of glassware to buy. And even though my heart wasn't in it, and definitely the wine glasses were the best on the market for sure, I noticed the quality and also the price. Wholesale price was pretty impressive. Everyone assumes Riedel is very expensive, but to tell you the truth, it's not. When it comes down to wholesale stuff for accounts, they have lots of options. They have handmade stuff, of course. But I started selling so much of it, or placing it at least, that it caught Riedel's attention. So they invited me to take this 3-day intensive course where George Riedel was going to be teaching it. It was out in Arizona, where he has a house out there in Arizona, believe it or not. And so I showed up and, I was like you, I was skeptical because I'd never gone through one of the tastings before where I was like, it's got to be marketing, right? Drink specific or wine specific glassware, it's got to be marketing. And as he started walking us through it, I started realizing that everything that he was saying about wine glasses and everything that I was experiencing with the wine glasses translated to things that no one had talked about in the cocktail world. Because you know how wine is. He was talking about the alcohol percentage of Amarone, for example. He says higher Amarone, like the higher alcohol content, you don't want that to hit the tip of your tongue because it'll be perceived as too too alcoholic. You want it to hit your mid palate. And so he's talking about tongue placement, and that's where the shape of the glass comes from, because your mid palate's a lot less sensitive than the tip of your tongue is. So I just started writing all of these notes down on cocktail napkins that were in front of me, and I whipped out my laptop and started making some very cursory 3D models of stuff. And everyone likes to retell this story because it gets pretty funny, but I didn't realize that he was standing over me. There was about 80 people in the room. As I'm feverishly like sketching pictures, you know, and volumes and like doing calculations and making a 3D model, and he slams his hand on the table. And if you ever meet George, he is a sweetheart. But when he's up on stage, he is that quintessential Austrian, German kind of like very intimidating, right? Mm-hmm. And so he says, "Hey, if you're not going to pay attention, get out of my room." Ooh. You know, in front of 80 people. And so all I did was I took my laptop and I turned it to him, and he saw, which is, you know, this glass, which we'll talk about first in a little bit, which is the neat glass, which is something that's been desperately needed in the market for quite a long time. But I said, "Hey, we need to talk at lunch." And he just looked at me, and like 3 seconds passed, and he looks at the napkins around me, and he goes, "I'll see you at lunch." I didn't know this at the time, but everybody in the room thought we were going to go out into the parking lot and get into a fist fight or something. But really what happened was we both in that moment, I like to say, George and I, it was like love at first sight. You know, we saw that both of us were thinking about things the same way,
Sure.
just different fields. And he saw that I was taking what he was teaching and implementing it into something that Riedel wasn't involved in yet and probably should be. And so we met at lunchtime. I got about halfway through my pitch, and he puts his hand on my shoulder and he goes, "Zane." And in my mind, I was thinking, okay, this is the moment. I said it. I said if I ever got a chance to be in front of a glassware maker, I would pitch as hard as I could.
Yeah.
Right? I'd put all those flaws that all of us complain about as much as I could in front of this person. And all I can do is my best. And if they get shot down, that's the way it is. Right. And so he put his hand on my shoulder and he stopped me. I thought he was going to go, "Nah, we're not interested in cocktail glassware. We're a wine glass company." But instead he said, "I'm in, let's do it. Just get it off of napkins and put it into a real presentation. And if you can get it to me by next week, that'd be great."
Wow.
And that was pretty much it. We went through the next 3 days, and I soaked up as much information from him as I possibly could. And I switched or added to all of the ideas I already had, because obviously 10 generations behind him of knowledge. I need to use that, right? I need to use him as much of a consultant as he was going to use me as a consultant from this.
Sure.
So it was very much a partnership from that point on. And a year and a half later, we were able to release the glassware worldwide, and that was amazing.
Pretty incredible. What a story, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty great story. Yeah, and we like to retell it. You know, George and I, it changes a little bit every time. That's the real one. It's the one that sometimes we tell the big groups is a little bit more romantic than that one, but that's how it happened for sure.
I almost see him like saying, "We looked longingly into each other's eyes," and at that moment,
it was more like I wanted to fight him, and you know, through his knowledge and his woo, his bartender wiles, he wooed me into making glassware for him.
It's a great story though. I do love it, and I think you know, just showing your passion and kind of collecting those notes throughout the years, I think you recognize that this is more than just somebody sketching on a napkin. You know, there's a lot here. So that's awesome,
yeah.
Man. That's a very great story.
Yeah, a lot of thought went into this glassware, and you know, I say a year and a half later, but that year and a half was almost pure R&D and prototyping, where we took it all over the place to the top bars all over the US, and we essentially give them a set, and I would sit there at the bar and I'd say, "Tear it apart, use it for a shift, throw it in the dishwasher, tell me what needs to change, tell me what's annoying to you." And some of the stuff that we'll go over with the glassware, especially the geekiest stuff, some of it wasn't even my idea. It came from the industry. Again, my name is on the boxes along with Riedel's, but really this is the industry's glassware as far as I'm concerned.
That's pretty cool. So let me talk to you a little bit about kind of the lineup that you guys launched with. What did you guys bring to market? What was the catalog look like now for you?
It was 6 in the beginning, right? So it was a neat glass, a rocks glass, a highball, a fizz, a sour glass, and a Nick and Nora. And then probably about 8 months after that release, it was apparent that I needed to produce a much better mixing glass for the market than what was available. And so I was able to release a mixing glass that I'm really, really proud of.
Awesome. Very cool. So yeah, let's kind of talk about some of the things that you guys changed, some of the things you added to the glassware. And I'll let you drive because there's nobody more familiar with it than you. So why don't we talk a little bit about it? And before we do, if you're listening to the audio podcast here, I highly recommend going to the YouTube link in the show notes because he's going to be showing off a lot of pieces of glassware here and probably using a lot of the physical elements of the glass to describe it. So definitely check it out over on the show notes. So Go ahead, Zane, take it away, man.
So like I said, the one that George first laid eyes on a cocktail napkin was this glass right here, which is the neat glass. Mm-hmm. Now, to me, this glass was very important to bring to the market because of something that a lot of, I guess, designers overlook, which is perception. How is a guest going to perceive, whether as at home when you're home bartending or in a bar, how are they going to perceive the drink that you're giving them? Sure. And one of the problems that we have in the bar is that if somebody orders a nice scotch or a nice whiskey, neat, usually it has to be served in the rocks glass, right? And a rocks glass is quite a bit bigger than the neat glass is. And one of the things that you'll notice on this glassware, and for those of you that are listening, again, definitely take a chance to see the visuals on YouTube. The design has a lot of function to it, but the design also has a built-in pour line. Oh, so nice. right where that kind of paddle design comes to a point, do you see that? That's the 2-ounce pour line on all this glassware.
Nice.
On the neat glass, a 2-ounce pour comes up almost to the halfway mark, right? Whereas that if I had to serve 2 ounces of $80 scotch in the rocks glass, look how much lower that is, right? Perception, it's much lower. So someone who doesn't know about the bar world will assume that we're underserving them, right? So I needed something that made it worthwhile. Somebody that said, I'm getting my money's worth when I drink here. Mm-hmm. The weight has to do with it as well, but more of it is visual. Same thing with cocktails. You've come across this a lot where somebody goes, hey, I'd like a Manhattan, but don't put it in a stemmed glassware. It's either they say something like, I'm clumsy, or they'll say something sexist, like, I don't want one of those girly glasses. Which I always respond as a bartender, especially if their wife or girlfriend is standing right there. I go, "Ooh, his masculinity is wrapped up in the glassware he uses." Yikes. Anyway, those people do exist, clumsy people too, and sometimes you're just in the mood to have it in a tumbler like this. Again, if I do a drink like a Manhattan in an old fashioned glass, I'm lucky if it comes up to a third. Right. But in a neat glass, it comes up to 2 centimeters from the top here. Right. So it looks like a full glass.
Sure.
So the cocktail
get a nice proper wash line in there, and everyone's happy.
Wash line. You're speaking my love language right now.
Man, I'm telling you. I told you.
Yeah. So it's for neat or one of those like single rocks, like a nice cold draft or Hoshizaki cube in there, or especially for stirred drinks like Sazeracs or Manhattan's martini variants that are served down. I needed to have that glass because perception is a big thing. Because I'm not so passionate about glassware. What I'm more passionate about is someone's experience, right? It's the full picture. And, like I said, when I was consulting, I had pretty much control over everything, the lighting, the music, everything you can imagine, the ice machines, the syrups. I didn't have control over glassware until this moment.
Well, and I'll tell you on my end too, when I was kind of getting my glassware situated for this build out and stuff, I had the hardest time finding anything in the neat category. Like my wife will tell you, it took me a year before I could find anything that was even close. And it was like an old school Libby glass. It wasn't anything great because there wasn't any great options out there. So the fact that a Sazerac would look like a proper cocktail in is pretty exciting.
Yeah, and it's also about like the feel in your hand, right? When you're sitting on that couch or you're sitting in that lounge chair or something, in one of these schwanky bars. You want to have a little bit of heft to it, not too much, because you don't want to baccarat the heck out of someone by having them do curls every time they take a sip. But it's important to me. There's a tactile feeling to it that I really, really wanted, and that goes into this design.
Sure.
Now, I am going to talk about the design on the outside a bit, because it does translate to all of the rest of the glassware that are in the tumbler category here.
Sure.
It looks pretty, right? It looks really nice.
Yeah,
I love
very
it.
nice. Kind
Doesn't
of
obstruct.
Art-deco-y.
Yeah, it doesn't obstruct the drink very much. It has these nice little panes, but really where it came down to was thermodynamics. A lot of things that we have to deal with when dealing with glassware behind the bar is very hot dishwashers and very cold ice, or glass chillers. And especially when we get busy, a hot glass will go directly into a glass chiller, or we'll try to cool down the glass as fast as possible with some crushed ice and some water, right? So I needed to take as much bulk out of the bottom here as possible. And that's where that starburst pattern comes from here, in order to make it so the bottom cooled down as fast as the top did. Now, we did a lot of tests with infrared cameras where we would put this into boiling hot water, take it out, and then watched it cool down. And if this was cooling down much slower than this, I would tell the tooling people for the molds to take more bulk out of the bottom and out of the sides.
Sure. So
it all cools down at the same time. That really factors into breakage long term.
Right.
But it gave me the opportunity to start thinking about other things. One of the biggest problems with breakage in a bar is not actually clumsy barbacks or clumsy bartenders. It's nesting of glasses inside of other glassware. And so I decided to do a little poll at one of my bars just to see how much glassware was actually broken that way. And it ended up being 70% of their total breakage was nested glassware getting stuck together.
Yep.
So I was looking for a reason now to fix that. And this starburst pattern, think of it more like a gear now. And for those of you that are listening, I'm looking at the bottom of the glass here, and it has a starburst pattern. But really what that is, and I'll grab the rocks glass, is a gear in order to have everything lock in butt to butt.
Yes.
So now it doesn't move, right? You can hear it. It doesn't slide, right? I have to really turn it in order for it to move. Now I can stack glassware on my bar, like to like, or like this with a rocks glass on top and a neat glass on top and a rocks glass on the bottom. But now that solved the problem of nested glassware without having to take away from someone's space, because that's important, especially in a New York bar.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's a nice little element too. I mean, because I know that for my own self, I've had to go to the hospital because of big old pint glasses stacked together, moving them from the dishwasher right over the fridge, and the bottom one shatters on you. And the nesting thing is definitely how I lost a ton of my glassware. So that's a smart element, and it looks good. It presents really well the way it's stacked that way.
Yeah, it's form and function, right? I mean, That really sells a lot of my friends when I was pitching them the idea of this glassware. They were just like, "Oh my God, that's next level! Like I don't have to stack glassware anymore." Yeah. But there's a lot of things that kind of work together with the design once we started getting going, and I started working with all those wonderful German engineers over in Germany, because I'm going to bring up the rocks glass next, right? Which for me, there is two things that this had to do. One, it had to hold large ice cubes, and it also had to hold cold draft and Hoshizaki ice cubes side by side naturally. What I mean by that is we all know about the inverted pyramid that happens with cold draft or Hoshizaki ice, right? Where there's that one ice cube on the bottom and then there's two or three on top. And it's like you have to take your spoon and kind of try to knock it down to the side to make your drink get displaced right? Again, perception, make that level go up to make it look like it's a full drink. Now, these are all things that slowed my bartenders down. I needed to solve this, right? So I told them the inside has to be vertical. And I didn't know this at the time, but most glassware is cantilevered on the inside for a reason, because it's cheaper. Because when the hot glass, or in this case crystal, gets put into the mold, a plunger then goes in to push the glass or the crystal up, and then to pull it out, it's much easier if it's at an angle. If it's straight, that's a lot of friction to pull out of the glass. And so what we did is we came up with a plunger that goes in and expands and then pulls out. So that way we weren't having to increase costs, but at the same time, we got these vertical sides on all of this glassware, which we're dealing with square ice cubes. It's important. Because you've probably done it before. You've had to take your bar spoon and knock the corners off of those nice, beautiful cubes, whether you're at home or behind a bar. Now, if you're at a bar, that's a lot of time. And also you're handling someone's ice a lot. And that's gross. Like, I don't care what anybody says, handling someone's ice is gross. So I wanted to eliminate that. And so I did. I took, this is my little fake ice cube here. But you'll notice that it goes all the way down to the bottom naturally.
That's so satisfying.
No more knocking corners off, which was very, very important to me. But also another thing that I hated was you'll see how much space there is. That's where your nose goes, because a lot of things, a lot of glassware out there doesn't factor in ice at all. Actually, all glassware out there doesn't factor in ice whatsoever. And so if you serve someone a drink with a large ice cube, you don't want it sticking out of the glass or even being level with the glass, because what's going to happen is you're going to bonk your nose on it and it's going to be uncomfortable. The experience is going to be tainted in a way. So yeah, beautiful. Large ice cubes.
I love it.
I love that glass. One of my favorites. One of my favorites for sure. And they stack, which is great, which is really, really important to me.
And they're beautiful too. They are stunning. Now, before we go too far, I do want to kind of ask you one more question though, too. And that is, price is always a consideration when we're talking about glassware behind bars. And I understand breakage kind of offsets some of that, but that initial upfront cost is pretty expensive. And just so everybody listening here, to be clear, this is not sponsored. I'm not pitching Riedel by any means. But I would like to kind of talk a little bit about cost, because for any bar, it's a consideration. As far as price points on this glassware, what are we talking about?
So it depends market to market, but sure. What you're looking at is sub $5 across the board and I'm gonna state this, and we're gonna get into a really funny anecdote in a second, where I got tipsy and I wrote an email and it made this kind of happen on accident. But it's triple tempered Austrian crystal, right? At sub $5. Now, the same warehouses that make this also make Baccarat. They also, the same factories. Sure. And they also do some Swarovski stuff as well, from what I've heard. Mm-hmm. So this isn't like it's cheap crystal by any means. It's actual real, like it's crystal. Unleaded, of course, because Riedel was one of the first pioneers for unleaded crystal, because they thought it was important before anybody else actually made regulations on it. But yeah, so across the board, all the glasses that we're showing, except for the mixing glass, which is also really inexpensive, sub $5. Here in New York, I think it's $4.75, for example. And I think in California, it can get pretty low, like $4.50, $4.25. And since it's they've partnered up with Southern Wine and Spirits, there's no delivery fee. So you can order it through Southern in most major markets. And so that really beats out some of these equipment places that sell things like Libby or Steelite, right? It might say, this is $4 a glass, but by the time it gets to your door, you're already pushing $4.75, $5, maybe even over because of delivery fee. Sure. Because that's how they make their money, really, to tell you the truth. And that's for the, give or take, that's Chinese glass made somewhere. I have no idea where. I hope no one's being taken advantage of or being exploited in the making of our glassware. I know for a fact none of this is, because I got to go out to Germany and Austria and see and meet the people who make this glassware. Mm-hmm. So I know exactly where it comes from. So yeah, I mean, I think that price is great. And when I was pitching the idea to Riedel, I told them that we have to get it under $5. Yeah. And you got to remember that these are wine glass makers, and wine glasses, especially Riedel wine glasses and similar quality products, they're handled with kid gloves a lot in accounts, because people know that they're delicate. In a bar, you're dealing with ice. Again, you're dealing with very hot dishwashers and very cold ice, and drunk people and hard services, and some drunk barbacks sometimes and some drunk bartenders. There's a lot of breakage. So I told them, listen, if you're able to get it sub $5, I promise you that quantity will make up for any sort of hit to your profit margin that you'll be taking. And there was no hesitation on their part. They just kind of trusted me. And it's proving to be true, right? Because glassware breaks in bars no matter what you do to it. But the triple tempered thing really was a game changer, because I don't know if most people know this or not, but all glassware that we get in bars, save for those pint glasses that some people use for Boston shakers or for beers, are only tempered once at the top third of the glass, because they're trying to protect the lip. Mm-hmm. Do you know that L-shaped break that you get in glassware all the time? The potato chip break, you might call it, or whatever it is. You think that happens here at the tip, but really where that happens is right here where the temper usually would end. Let's see if I can get that to focus. Get it to end. And that's a stress fracture that happens from hot dishwashers to cold ice over and over and over again. And there starts to form stress fractures right here. So it shoots straight up and it shoots straight over along the temper line, right? Straight over. Next time that happens to one of your glasses that aren't mine, you're going to notice that and you're going to think, this is one of those glasses that's only tempered on the lip.
I'm thinking about all the glass break in my history and I'm like, oh, okay, I know exactly what you're talking about. That potato chip crack,
Boonk, right over, so
that's super interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that funny anecdote.
Temper was temper. I thought it was going to go all the way through the glass, but that makes
me too. Me too. I learned about the importance of tempering from watching a glass blower make what's called a St. Rupert's drop. Have you ever heard of what a St. Rupert's drop is? Mm-hmm. For those of you at home that don't know what this is, you can drop molten glass into a bucket of water, and essentially what forms is a big teardrop with a really long, thin tail. And there's some really weird physics that go on with this, because what happens is all the glass on the inside is still molten hot, but the glass on the outside from being in contact with the water gets really, really hard and rigid very fast. So what happens is all of that energy gets stored within the drop part of the St. Rupert's drop. And so it's so hard. You can hit the drop with a hammer as hard as you want, and it will not break. It'll actually dent metal. But if you break that tail, and it's so thin, just a little bit, the thing disintegrates. Look this up on YouTube.
It's pretty incredible.
Rupert's drop. Yeah. Watch it with someone who has like a phantom camera, one of those high-speed cameras, because it's insane what happens to these things. But the same thing can happen to glassware.
Yeah, I actually saw it on a YouTube channel called Smarter Every Day, where they talked about it, and it does it on
That's a really good one.
Camera, and it's fascinating.
Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah,
but the same thing to some degree. Sure. Yeah. The same thing can definitely happen within glassware, especially glassware like this that has a thicker bottom to it, right? So you want to be aware of that. And so I got a little bit tipsy because I was out at my friend's bars one night, and I was watching. I think it actually was Smarter Every Day. And so I got on my computer and I started emailing one of the engineers, the German guys that was helping with making the glassware. And I said, okay, so I think that we should do a triple temper, like full temper process going from this degree to like I'm telling a German engineer what to do. What the hell am I thinking, right? Like the audacity of me to say this. And I said, because, I was thinking about the inherent energy that can be caught in the glass, because I thought I was smarter every day, right? To give those guys a plug. And I went to bed. I woke up in the morning and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote that. That was so ballsy of me. What was I thinking? What was I thinking? And I got an email back from him and all it said was, Zane, you're crazy. Now, text messages and emails are really, really, really hard to get context, right? And so I was like, oh my God, I hope I didn't mess up anything. So fast forward a couple months later, where I got the chance to go to Austria and Germany and go to these factories, and I walk in and hard hats and viz vests weren't really there. You know what I mean? It was because it's not open to the public. And this guy comes running up. He goes, "Are you Zane?" And I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Great, follow me." And he squeezes between these two pieces of machinery with molten glass and crystal, dripping down. And I was like, what? And his arm comes out, from between the machinery and does one of these, like, come this way. I was like, all right, I guess if I get maimed, this scar will tell a really cool story.
We're talking like 2,500 degree temperature, molten glass, right?
Yeah. And not open to the public. Obviously, this is for people who know what they're doing. So I squeeze through there and I see this circular conveyor belt, and my rocks glass is sitting on these conveyor belts, turning around and going on this conveyor belt around and around. And there's torches on all three quadrants of the glass shooting on it as it rotates. And I was like, what is this? He's like, this is the machine I built after your email about triple tempering and making sure the whole thing's tempered. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he was like, yeah, it was a great idea.
That's
oh my God, off a drunk email, he builds this thing. Because that machinery, you got to know, you can't just buy it in a catalog.
Right.
When you come up with a new line of glassware, they pretty much have to build that machinery from the ground up, proprietary. And so that was crazy. That taught me the significance of drunk emails. So be careful out there, guys.
And watch what you say too, right?
Make sure it's right. Yeah, absolutely.
That's really cool. So there's one more particular piece of glass I want to talk about, and that's the sour glass, because I think this is an important one to have a conversation about, because even in our Facebook group, this one particular piece came up quite a bit. So would you kind of talk to me about kind of some of the design elements, not only from a form but from a function perspective as well?
This glass was the biggest pain in the butt, and worth it. Right,
sure.
Because there's a lot of thoughtfulness that goes in this. So I'm going to hold this up, and for you guys at home, it's like it's a tulip-shaped glass, right, where the lip turns out. Think of the closest you can come to what's available in the market now would be what's called a sherbet glass, but that's not usually used for cocktails, and it's much thicker, but it's the same kind of general shape.
Yeah, kind of like a larger Nick and Nora, but with the ends flared out, right?
Yeah, similar. I would say it's the antithesis of a Nick and Nora, and we'll get into why it's the exact opposite, actually, of a Nick and Nora.
Sure. Okay.
Because again, you got to think about all those things that George was saying in that initial time I met him about tongue placement, like where you're placing the actual liquid on someone's tongue by using the lip of the glass, or where you're trying to keep it away from.
Sure.
So this is obviously bigger than a Nick and Nora, right? This is over 7 ounces right here. And the reason why this was such a pain in the butt, this glass in particular, was this curve right here. And I'm pointing to the lip of the glass for those of you that are listening. Where it comes out, I needed at the wash line that I wanted for a daiquiri, which is about 2 centimeters below the lip, I wanted this glass to look good. But if I added an egg white to this drink, or aquafaba, I needed 1.5 ounces difference from that 2 centimeter mark to the lip in order to accommodate for that nice frothy head. Because what happens in all of my bars is that I have to buy 2 glasses. I have to buy a glass that I take my regular shaken drinks and put them into, and then another glass that I put my traditional sours into. And I wanted to eliminate that glass from my back bar, the need for that extra glass. And that's where this came from. And then thinking about what happens when you make a classic sour, which is a vehicle for aromatics on the top, right? Because you can put bitters on top, or you can put rose petals, or whatever you want, whatever you can think of. Black pepper works really well for those of you at home that haven't used black pepper in cocktails. I highly suggest it on a sour. Like in Army Navy, with salt and pepper instead of bitters is called a Special Forces, and that's one of my favorite all-time drinks. So you get that kind of black pepper on the nose. But I needed a glass that puts someone's nose in the glass when they're sipping. And I also needed the tip of their tongue, which is very sensitive, to be the first thing that touches the smooth head of a sour glass. So that's why this lip goes out, because this forces the placement of the liquid to be on the tip of your tongue, where it's the most tactile. Now, for a really good daiquiri, that means those really fine ice chips that you get by shaking it correctly. I want that to hit the tongue first, because that adds complexity, right? The texture adds complexity. Right. If I used a coupe, it hits the mid palate and it's not as sensitive, and so you lose that aspect of the drink very quickly. Now, when you dash bitters over the top, and bartenders can attest to this, the most annoying thing that happens is that it will go onto the base of the glass, right? And you have to take time out with your bar rag that you hope is clean, or you have to grab some cocktail napkins, which also looks amateur. And you have to take the time to wipe off the base of your glass before you serve it to a guest. So what I did was I made sure that the width of the glass here is wider than the base. So now when you dash the bitters over, it lands on each side of the glass as opposed to on the base of the glass.
Sure.
And so it speeds up the bartender very, very quickly because you can just dash over the top and do whatever design you want, and you don't have to worry about the base being all gunked up by bitters or whatever you're using. So
Nice.
the sour glass is really important to me, just because it's always been that in-between glass. Even when we're using coupes, you can never really find something that fits a traditional sour very well. Until now, this fits a traditional sour with no meniscus, meaning it doesn't bubble over the top. It's nice and flat over the top.
It really is a beautiful piece of glassware. I actually got a couple samples a couple of weeks ago, and I haven't had a chance to try that one. But that one in particular, I was like, oh, I can't wait to get my hands on that one. So yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And so I have a question for you, and this is probably the most asked question from both of our Facebook groups, and that is, how does the thickness of the lip of the rim contribute to the overall experience? Because I know a lot of glassware companies has that rolled lip, and my understanding is that it helps to kind of protect that edge. But I wanted to ask you, since you have all the experience and you have tapped into the Riedel family brain, how important is that lip thickness on a final cocktail glass?
So really important for perception. Again, it's one of those things that you notice without noticing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Where if you have a clunky, thick glass, you perceive it as being cheap, which is weird because weight is also perception too. If something's really, really light, you perceive it as being cheap as well. So it's kind of like this weird juxtaposition. So for like these glasses, the tumblers, the lip gets thinner as you get to the top right here. It starts about here and it starts getting just a little bit thinner because that's important. To me, it's tactile, right? We were talking about the importance of the tip of your tongue. And your mid palate and things like that. Same thing applies for anything that's going to touch your lips or the tip of your tongue, which is going to be the glassware. And so it's a bit of a trade-off, right? I am going to admit that this glass is significantly more fragile than this glass is.
Sure.
So we get the focus, right?
And we're talking specifically about the sour versus the neat glass, right?
Correct. The outturned lip, obviously, it's not protected like the Nick and Nora is, which we'll get to in a second. And also it's quite a bit thinner. But it's a good trade-off, in my opinion. If you know what you're getting yourself into, it's a special glass that can really make somebody go, this is the best daiquiri or the best whiskey sour I've ever had in my life, or the best pisco sour I've had in my life. Because I'm looking to have the whole experience, right?
Right.
A big portion of it is someone's ability to bartend, but another big portion is how you're presenting what you're crafting for someone. Sure. Atmosphere, music, lighting, making sure that no one is, smelly around your guests, right? But it all factors in, right? And so I wanted to make sure that this glass and the Nick and Nora in particular, when you're talking about thinness of the rim, all of it comes together to be the best experience possible.
Perfect. Okay.
Hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, and I think this was, like I said, this was probably the most asked question in both of our groups about the thickness and that, in particular with the rim. And I know Riedel in particular has a lot of experience with designing glassware with that in mind and targeting kind of the taste buds. So I thought it'd be good to just kind of hint upon. So definitely appreciate that. And then you mentioned the Nick and Nora, and I think that's probably the last one we have time for, but I would love to talk about this one because I think this one is really important as well, because that's kind of almost rounds out the bar cocktail lineup. I do love the fizz glass, and I'm so glad
you made highball, right?
and
the mixing glass, which I would love to talk about, mainly because I finally came up with something that doesn't break all the damn time, and also something that I can stir that's heavy enough without having to hold on to it, right?
Sure.
But also, this looks round, but it's not. The inside diameter of this is specific to make sure that your julep strainer locks in underneath the pour spout here without having any gaps, so no ice comes through. So this is your mixing glass. I'm really proud of this. Also, this isn't 2 ounces, this is 3 ounces. So if you're doing batch cocktails in your bars, you can do 3 ounces right to that line, right to the little design line, and bingo.
Love it.
We'll come back to that some other time. And the fizz glass, the fizz glass, which is gorgeous.
It's just dead sexy, man. That thing is so beautiful.
I know, and it has to be. Remember how I said the inside has to be parallel? More so for the fizz glass, because you want to get that push pop on Ramos Gin Fizzes.
Right.
If you have a glass that does this on the inside, the energy goes up and out, and you get that that muffin top. Which, hey, I like muffin tops. I just don't like muffin tops on my Ramos Gin Fizzes, right? So that verticality is really important. So it comes out like a Flintstone
like
push
a
pop.
chimney versus,
Yeah, exactly. But you asked about the Nick and Nora.
Yes.
Now, the Nick and Nora is very important because this is the only Nick and Nora on the market. Steelite would like to think that the Rona 5-star glass is the Nick and Nora. It's actually not. I had a really good conversation with Dale DeGroff about the Rainbow Room when he was trying to find this exact glass. If you don't know, the Nick and Nora is based off of the movie called The Thin Man, where the two main characters, Nick and Nora, this movie was from the 1930s. It was a play first, and before that it was a book. But the movie was wildly more popular. Those two actors were actually considered the Brad and Angelina of their time, even though they weren't married at all. They weren't even together. They're married to other people. But they were so influential at the time that in The Thin Man, they're drinking martinis very liberally.
Like constantly.
Out of this glass. Mm-hmm. This is not a coupe. It's deeper than a coupe, right? And the lip goes in. It's not as flat bottomed as a coupe is. And the whole reason and why I say it's the antithesis of the sour glass is because the lips do exactly the opposite, right? They actually fit right together, literally the opposite. If the sour glass puts your nose in the glass and delivers the drink to the tip of your tongue, this is designed to have you tilt your head back and deliver the drink to your mid palate. And the reason for that is this is for everything stirred, right? Sure. The sour glass is for everything shaken. This is for everything stirred. Wildly different volumes in those two styles of cocktails. And bartenders that are listening know that. And so I need high proof alcohol drinks like martinis and Manhattan variants to hit your mid palate. So I need this curve to tilt your head back. I also don't want your nose stuck in this glass because there's a lot of fumes off-gassing from a high-proof alcohol content drink. So that's why this is really, really important. And if you actually freeze frame, I even pulled up pictures of Nick and Nora drinking out of this exact same glass. Believe it or not, I put it up on a projector and I traced that shape so I could get it exact.
Oh,
and
cool.
The volume is based off of dilution and a lot of other things.
Right.
But yeah, the Nick and Nora this is the only Nick and Nora on the market. The one from Rona 5-star I like that glass a lot. Don't get me wrong. It's a cocktail glass. Mm-hmm. It's not a Nick and Nora. You need it to tilt in. And another thing is that this was designed solo, meaning that the one from Rona 5-star is a white wine glass cut in half.
Oh, interesting.
Once I've said that to you now, once I say that to you now, you're never going to see that glass the same way ever again. You're going to look at it and be like, that's half a wine glass. What's going on? Yeah. So I'm really proud of that one
too, because they already have the tooling and everything needed to do it. So
well, that's exactly what happened. There's a company, and this is what Dale DeGroff told me. There's this company that he was in contact with here in New York. It was a small company, and he said, I need a glass that isn't like this. It's not a martini glass that's that typical V shape anymore. I need something that is curved. And they came back to him and said, the closest that we can come to is this, and it was their white wine glass cut in half.
Oh, interesting.
And at the time, he was like, I guess this is as close as I can get. It's not a V. Let's go with it. I asked him how much, back then, because I think that was in the 80s, how much were you paying for those per glass? I mean, that's pretty, I know about runs and how much you have to produce in order to get the cost down, right? And he was like, I think we were paying like $21 to $24 a glass. I was in the 80s. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, it was kind of crazy, but I needed it. And that's the closest I could come. And now everyone calls it a Nick and Nora. And Dale said, and in my head, I always hate it because I know it's not a Nick and Nora, but it's the closest they could get to. So fast forward to present day, that company was bought by Steelite and it became Rona 5-star, which is where that Nick and Nora glass, quote unquote, comes from.
Sure.
But it's not a Nick and Nora glass. This is a Nick and Nora glass, and we did it, guys. We have a real Nick and Nora on the market.
And it's a beautiful piece. It really is.
It's elegant, right? It's the whole reason we have coupes in the bar is because of the lack of the Nick and Nora. The coupe is the closest we could get to that shape. And so it was out of necessity. Champagne coupe is horrible for champagne, just like it's horrible for cocktails, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Too much surface area, way too much surface area.
So I'm going to kind of switch gears here because we're running up on our time. But I do have a couple questions I think that you're the expert on and could probably answer. So it might go a little bit kind of rapid fire, but there's definitely some room to kind of, talk about this real quick. If somebody's looking for a piece of glass, what kind of tips do you have for them to spot a quality piece of glass versus, let's call it a commodity piece of glass?
Sure. So, you're going to look for seams in your glass. If you're paying anything that's over $8 a glass and it still has seams where you can see where the mold came together, then that's a cheap piece of glass, and it's probably obviously not tempered like we talked about. Save your money. Buy vintage instead. You can get some really, really good deals at estate sales just on eBay alone, or buy my glassware because it's really inexpensive especially for what it is. But the seams, another thing to really look out for is keep in mind what you're putting in it, right? For the longest time, we've only cared about what the glass looks like, and then we fit the drink into it. Instead, why don't you think about the drink itself, the one that you want to make, the volume of that drink, and then get a glass that is appropriate for that. So that way, when you're serving that drink or you're drinking it yourself, it's a much more enjoyable experience because everything is the right levels.
Perfect. Also, kind of on that same line, we've talked about this a couple times during the podcast, but the question is, what aspects of a piece of glassware really contribute to the overall drinking experience? And I think you touched on two that I can call out real quick. One of them is weight. Just the physical weight of a glass sometimes conveys more value. And the second piece that we talked about was the thinness of the lip. Is there anything else that we may have missed as far as that goes?
Yeah, the biggest complaint that I get when I was doing this glassware, I was telling them that I wanted to have a nice weight when we were going through the prototype phase. And the complaint that I got the most was that glassware can be too heavy, right? It can feel too clunky. So there is a breaking point for weight there. So keep that in mind. You don't want to make people do reps every time they sip. The other thing I would talk about is the actual clarity of the glass. Now we're dealing with crystal. And so that means like when sunlight or direct light hits this glass, it's a prism. So it creates rainbows. And it's the beauty is if you set this next to a glass, it's night and day. So another thing I would say is like quality of the glass itself, because you're putting beautiful spirits in here. I got a random bottle of Dickel right now, but this is a beautiful color in here. Mm-hmm. And so if you're putting this into a glass that refracts light really, really well, the perception is just the overall experience is so much better. So I'd say that's a big one as well. Perfect. Other than, of course, getting the right volumes, right? You want to make sure the drink fits. You don't want it all the way.
I think a lot of it is the aesthetics, the wash line where it hits in the glass. All that stuff is so important.
So important.
Not only to kind of, value. People just assume value when things hit higher in the glass, and especially with those kind of shorter style cocktails like the Sazerac we were talking about. Cool, perfect. Let's see. This was something I thought was really interesting, and this was regarding kind of some of the science that was brought up a couple of years ago about kind of going away from the tasting zones in the tongue, right? Yeah, this might have popped up on your radar. Yeah. What's that?
The tasting is all BS. The sensitivity is real, though.
Perfect. Okay, because I really want to bring this up because I think when I heard that, I immediately thought of, specific purpose-built glassware and how this is going to affect that. So what you're saying is basically the approach, or the end result is still the same, is that it really does kind of enhance the overall cocktail, overall drink, but the mechanism is different. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, you got to think of your tongue like a finger, right? Right here is not nearly as sensitive as the tip, right?
Sure.
So that means that anything that touches here is perceived different than anything that's touched here. Same thing on your tongue. So that's why mechanically you have to think about the design of your glassware, about where it's delivering that liquid on your guest's tongue, really. And that's what we aimed to do. And that mindset really did come from George's thought process when making wine glassware. And I've just translated it over to high alcohol, mid palate, low alcohol, lots of texture, tip of the tongue. And it's pretty much that simple. There's no black magic to it. It's just common sense when you think about it.
Sure, absolutely. And one last question from the group, and that is, imagine some really amazing cocktail that usually gets put in a specific glassware. Have you, in your adventures, found that it's actually better in a different glassware? Let's talk maybe a sour or a spirit-driven cocktail in particular.
Well, I mean, again, I'm gonna toot my own horn, but like sours are always put in coupes. They just are, and so it's the opposite of what it should be. I would rather have a traditional sour without ice, in a rocks glass than in a coupe, to tell you the truth. So for me, the sour glass is nice and everything, but if it's a little bit too delicate for your bar, I would suggest in a bar, put things like egg white cocktails in a neat into a rocks glass instead. Right, because the perception is going to be a lot better. The reception of it is going to be a lot better. Because the last thing you really want that to do is get lost on someone's mid palate. You want it to hit the tip of the tongue as much as possible. And of course, the Sazerac that has to go in a neat glass. Period. I don't care. It heats up too fast. If you put it in a rocks glass, again, surface area, it heats up too fast, and so that nice ice cold Sazerac, and you go get a really good Sazerac, and the glass is frosty chilled, right? Yeah, that's important. So important. So
you have no idea how much energy I put into finding the correct or a usable glass for a Sazerac, and my wife was like, "But just put it in a bucket." And I was like, "No, there's so much around this that that's I think why
I wish we had more time to geek out about it, because there's so much more we could talk about with this line, and also the thought process.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the most interesting, and I'll kind of cap it off here in a second here, but I think one of the most interesting glassware experiences I ever had was around there was a brewery, and they etched the bottom of their glassware in a D, and I can't remember the name of it. It's a Belgian company. But what happened is it created nucleation sites for the carbonation to adhere to, and Duvel. And I know I'm mispronouncing it, but it was Duvel. And what would happen is the bubbles would come up in a pillar in the same fashion as a D. So you would have this small cloud in the top of your glass that had that shape of a D in it. And I thought that was the coolest thing. So I'm really interested to see if that could ever be something that could be specially made, like etched into the bottom of a fizz glass. How cool would that be?
I mean, that would be awesome. I agree. I've had something similar happen. And I know that Riedel, on their champagne glasses, they etch a circle. And they sometimes do a spiral. I've seen a spiral as well on the inside that makes it, go up into a spiral, which is also very, very cool. Those type of experiences, as long as it doesn't hinder your ability to get alcohol into your system. Because a lot of times out there, glassware can be really unique and it can be really interesting to look at. But then the actual physical, act of drinking out of it is a letdown, to say the least. I mean, I could say champagne flutes are one of my least favorite drinks, because where the heck do you put your nose? I just don't know what to do. I don't like that glass at all. I think Riedel's been known to do specialty things like that, and I know that they have quite a few pieces of machinery that does like a sand etching. And we talked about doing some stuff on the inside of the glass, and actually the sand etching is on the bottom here. With the Riedel. I'm holding up the highball glass right now. but they're on all of them. So yeah, I mean, everything's a possibility. Again, this is the first time that a glassware company has ever listened to the industry, the bar industry. And so I want to keep that dialogue open, right? I have the ability to, pick up the phone or an email and convey what you guys are thinking out there. And I want to hear some ideas too, and maybe even some other gaps in the market, because, we want to extend this line, and we also want it to be an open dialogue. I want it to be the industry's glassware, not Zane's glassware, right? I just want to be the person that puts it into motion for you guys. So keep that in mind. If you have any suggestions, reach out for sure.
Perfect. And let me ask you, what would be the best way for people to reach out to you directly if they have? I'm sure you're going to get, a couple of people reaching out to you after this podcast, but what would be the best way for them to reach you?
Probably through Instagram is the best. That way you can also see the glassware too. And give you a better idea of the uses that we're using this glassware for. And of course, you can just direct message me, and that's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
And actually, you can send me your Instagram handle, or you can tell me online.
It's just Zane Harris.
Okay.
And the picture is the Nick and Nora glass on a green background. So it's going to be hard to mistake that for anybody else.
Perfect. Awesome. So that being said, we got your Instagram handle. And what else are you working on, man? What else you got coming up? It sounds like you're kind of a mover and a shaker. So what do you got on your horizon here?
There's quite a bit, but the thing that I'm most proud of right now is something that I started with my wife, which was a production company that is geared specifically towards smaller brands and bars and restaurants and hotels that really want to kind of communicate to us, to the industry people, right? Because every time we see a booze commercial or a picture on Instagram, a lot of times you can tell that a bartender didn't make it. And, it's the limp mint or something. And so what we did was, you saw this big gap, especially with what's going on in the world. People are relying more and more on digital media and content creation. And a lot of production companies simply don't have that kind of expertise or the know-how to produce that quantity of content that we need for things like Instagram and YouTube and fill in the blank. And so that's what's going on. It's called Gateweaver. You can just check it out at gateweaver.com. We've got some videos that we've already done up there, and we're very proud of it. It's a much different style than anyone else is used to seeing. It's aesthetically pleasing. Let me put it that way. I won't spoil it for you. Go check out gateweaver.com. If if anybody needs help producing some content, reach out to us, because we employ industry people who are interested in production as well. Because that's important for me. Bartenders get old and they can't shake cocktails for the rest of their life. I have people that are getting elbow replacement surgery all the time because they're in their mid-30s and they've been shaking cocktails with cold draft ice for way too long. We want to try to make like a skill set that they can take with them, because I'm sure you've done shoots before. The stylist on set gets paid more than the photographer sometimes. Yeah. And if one of our bar friends can be the stylist on set and make sure the drinks look pretty, make sure the ice is right and the wash line is on point, that's a nice little paycheck for you. That's not a 14-hour shift behind a bar.
Yeah, and it creates opportunity to move forward out and still support the industry. And I think that's something that we really believe in over here as well, is just having that next step and leveraging the experience that we all have. But man, I can't thank you enough for your expertise, dude. You're a rock star, and I really do wish this was 2 hours long, because I think we're just scratching the top, the surface level stuff.
Yeah, we really are, and this is a lot of fun. I hope we can do it in the future. Maybe we can talk about a little bit more than glassware sometime. So let me know if there's a gap in your schedule. You need a guest. I'm here for you.
Cool, awesome, man. Thanks, Zane, and hopefully we'll chat soon.
Great.
So once again, thank you to Zane Harris for joining us on a podcast and showing us all the intricacies and forethought that goes into producing a really cool lineup for bar glasses. So we'll have all the links in the show notes over at mixologytalk.com/198. I can't talk for some reason today. But yeah, jump on over there and we'll have links to everything we chatted about today in the podcast. So we'll have some more podcasts for everybody in the future. But until then, I hope you guys are having some great cocktails and staying safe. Cheers.